It was April, and Ethan Carter was studying for a critical examination. As the date loomed closer, he decided he needed to go somewhere and study by himself. He wanted none of the distractions of the seaside or the serene beauties of the countryside. He sought a quiet, ordinary little town where he could work completely undisturbed. He packed his suitcases with clothes and books, then scanned a railway timetable for a town he had never heard of. He found one, Oakhaven, and bought a ticket. He told no one where he was going. After all, he did not want to be disturbed. That is how Ethan Carter arrived in Oakhaven. It was a market town, bustling with activity for a few hours once a week. The rest of the time, it was a very quiet, sleepy little place. Ethan spent his first night at the town's only hotel. The landlady, Mrs. Gable, was very kind and helpful, but the hotel was not quite quiet enough for him. The next day, he began searching for a house to rent. There was only one place that appealed to him. It was more than quiet. It was deserted and utterly lonely. It was a large, old 17th century house with tiny windows that resembled a prison and a high brick wall surrounding it. It would be hard to imagine a more unwelcoming place, but it suited Ethan perfectly. He went to find the local lawyer responsible for the house, a Mr. Davies. The lawyer was thrilled to rent the house to him. "I'd be glad to let you have it for free," he said, "just to have someone living in it again after all these years. It's been empty so long that people have spread a lot of foolish stories about it. You'll be able to prove that the stories are wrong." Ethan didn't think it was necessary to ask for more details about these foolish stories. He paid his rent, and Mr. Davies gave him the name of an old servant to look after him. He left the lawyer's office with the keys to the house in his pocket. He then went to see Mrs. Gable, the hotel landlady. "I'm renting a house for a few weeks," he said. "Can you advise me about shopping, please? What do you think I shall need?" "Where are you going to stay, sir?" the landlady asked. Ethan told her. She threw up her hands in horror. "Not the judge's house," she cried, her face growing pale as she spoke. He asked her to tell him more. "Why is it called the judge's house?" he asked. "And why doesn't anyone want to live in it?" "Well, sir," she said, "a long time ago, I don't know how long, a judge lived there. He was a hard, cruel judge, sir. A real hanging judge. He showed no mercy to anyone. But as for the house itself, well, I can't say. I've often asked, but nobody could tell me for certain." She found it hard to explain. The general feeling in the town was that there was something deeply wrong with the judge's house. "As for me, sir," she said, "I wouldn't stay there alone, not for all the money in the bank." Then she apologized to Ethan. "I'm sorry to worry you, sir, really I am. But if you were my son, I wouldn't let you stay there one night on your own. I'd go there myself and pull the big alarm bell that's on the roof." Ethan was grateful for her kindness and concern. "How good of you to be so anxious about me, Mrs. Gable," he said. "But there's really no need to worry. I'm studying for an important examination and I have no time for horrors or mysteries." The landlady kindly promised to do his shopping for him. Ethan then went to see the old servant Mr. Davies had recommended. Her name was Mrs. Peterson, and she seemed pleasant and eager to please her new master. When he returned with her to the judge's house 2 hours later, he found Mrs. Gable waiting outside with several people. There were men and boys carrying parcels and another 2 men with a bed. "But there are beds in the house," cried Ethan in surprise, "and nobody's slept in them for 50 years or more." "No, sir, I won't let you risk your life in an old, damp bed." The landlady was obviously curious to see the inside of the house, but at the same time, she was clearly afraid. At the smallest noise, she held nervously to Ethan's arm. Together, they explored the whole house. After his exploration, Ethan decided to live in the dining room. It was large enough for both working and sleeping. Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Peterson began to arrange everything. Soon, the baskets were unpacked. Ethan saw that the kind Mrs. Gable had brought many good things from her own kitchen. Before she left, she turned to Ethan and said, "I do hope you will be all right, sir. But I must say, I couldn't sleep here with all the ghosts." When she left, Mrs. Peterson laughed. "Ghosts," she said. "There are no ghosts. There are rats and insects and doors that need oiling. There are windows that blow open in the wind. Look at the old oak walls of this room, sir. They are hundreds of years old. Don't you think there will be rats and insects behind the wood? You will see plenty of rats here, sir. But you won't see any ghosts, I'm sure of that. Now, you go and have a nice walk, sir, and when you come back, I'll have this room all ready for you." She kept her promise. When Ethan returned, he found the room clean and neat. A fire was burning in the ancient fireplace. She had lit the lamp and put his supper ready on the table. "Good night, sir," she said. "I have to go now and get my husband's supper. I'll see you in the morning." "This is wonderful," said Ethan to himself as he ate Mrs. Peterson's excellent food. When he had finished, he pushed the dishes to the other end of the table, put more wood on the fire, and began to study. Ethan worked without stopping until about 11 o'clock. Then he added more wood to the fire and made a pot of tea. He was enjoying himself very much. The fire burned brightly, its light dancing on the old oak walls and throwing strange shadows around the room. His tea tasted excellent, and there was nobody to disturb him. Then, for the first time, he noticed how much noise the rats were making. Were they making all this noise while I was studying? He thought. No, I don't think they were. Perhaps they were afraid of me at first. Now they have become braver. How busy they were, and what a lot of noise they made. Up and down they rushed behind the old oak walls, over the ceiling, and under the floor. Ethan remembered Mrs. Peterson's words. "You'll see plenty of rats, but you won't see any ghosts." Well, he said with a smile, she was right about the rats anyway. He picked up the lamp and looked around the beautiful room. There were some old pictures on the walls, but they were covered with dust and dirt. Here and there he saw small holes in the walls. From time to time, the curious face of a rat stared at him. Then, with a scratch and a squeak, it was gone. The thing that interested him most, however, was the rope of the great alarm bell on the roof. The rope hung down in a corner of the room, to the right of the fireplace. He found a huge, high-backed oak chair and pulled it up beside the fire. There he sat and drank his last cup of tea. Then he put more wood on the fire and sat down at the table again with his books. For a time, the rats disturbed him with their scratching and squeaking, but he got used to the noise and soon he forgot everything except his work. Suddenly, he looked up. Something had disturbed him, but he did not know what it was. He sat up and listened. The room was silent. That was it. The noise of the rats had stopped. "That's what disturbed me," said Ethan with a smile. He looked around the room and saw an enormous rat. It was sitting on the great high-backed chair by the fire, staring at him with hate in its small, red eyes. Ethan picked up a book and pretended to throw it, but the rat did not move. It showed its great white teeth angrily, and its cruel eyes shone mercilessly in the lamplight. "Why, you!" cried Ethan. He picked up the poker from the fireplace and jumped up. Before he could strike, however, the rat leaped to the floor with a squeak. It ran up the rope of the alarm bell and disappeared into the darkness. Strangely, the squeaks and scratches of the other rats in the walls began again. By this time, Ethan no longer felt like working. Outside, the birds were singing. Soon it would be morning. He climbed into bed and immediately fell asleep. He slept so deeply that he did not hear Mrs. Peterson come in. She dusted the room and made his breakfast, then woke him with a cup of tea. After breakfast, he put a book in his pocket and went out for a walk, buying a few sandwiches on the way. He found a pretty, quiet little park and spent most of the day studying there. On his way home, he called at the hotel to thank Mrs. Gable for her kindness. She looked at him searchingly. "You must not work too hard, sir. You look pale this morning. Too much studying isn't good for anyone. But tell me, sir, did you have a good night?" "Oh, I was all right," said Ethan with a smile. The ghosts haven't troubled me yet, but the rats had a party last night. There was one old devil with red eyes. He sat up on the chair above the fire. He didn't move until I picked up the poker. Then he ran up the rope of the alarm bell. I didn't see where he went. It was too dark. Dear God, cried Mrs. Gable, an old devil sitting by the fire. Take care, sir. Take care. What do you mean? Asked Ethan in surprise. An old devil, the old devil, perhaps. Ethan started to laugh. Please forgive me, Mrs. Gable, he said at last. I just couldn't help laughing at the idea of the devil himself sitting by my fire. He laughed again, then went home for dinner. That evening, the noise of the rats began earlier. After dinner, he sat down by the fire to drink his tea, then settled at the table to work. The rats disturbed him more than the previous night. They scratched and squeaked, ran about, and stared at him from holes in the walls, their eyes shining like tiny lamps in the firelight. But Ethan was becoming used to them. Sometimes the bravest rats ran out onto the floor. Now and again, when they disturbed him, Ethan shook his papers at them and they ran to their holes at once. He worked hard for several hours. All at once, he was disturbed by a sudden silence. There was not a sound. The huge room was as silent as the grave. Ethan remembered the previous night. He looked at the chair by the fireside and got a terrible shock. There, on the great high-backed oak chair, sat the same enormous rat, staring at him with hate. Without thinking, Ethan picked up the nearest book and threw it. It missed, and the rat did not move. So Ethan again picked up the poker. Again, the rat ran up the rope of the alarm bell, and once more the other rats started their scratching and squeaking. Ethan was unable to see where the rat had gone. The lamplight did not reach the high ceiling, and the fire had burned low. He looked at his watch. It was almost midnight. He put more wood on the fire and made tea, then sat down in the great oak chair by the fire. I wonder where that old rat went, he thought. I must buy a rat trap in the morning. He lit another lamp and placed it so that it would shine into the right-hand corner of the wall by the fireplace. He got several books ready to throw at the creature. Finally, he lifted the rope of the alarm bell, put it on the table, and fixed the end of it under the lamp. As he handled the rope, Ethan noticed how pliable it was. You could hang a man with it, he thought. Then he stood back and admired his preparations. There, my friend, he said aloud. I think I'll learn your secret this time. He started work again. But once again he was disturbed by a sudden silence. Then the bell rope moved a little and the lamp on top of it moved too. Ethan made sure his books were ready. Then he looked along the rope. As he looked, the great rat dropped from the rope onto the old oak chair. It sat there, staring at him angrily. He picked up a book and aimed it at the rat. The creature jumped cleverly to one side. Ethan threw another book, but without success. Then, as Ethan stood with a third book in his hand, ready to throw, the rat squeaked and seemed to be afraid. Ethan threw the book, and it hit the rat's side. With a squeak of pain and fear, and a look of real hate, it ran up the back of the chair and made a great jump onto the rope of the alarm bell. It ran up the rope like lightning, while the heavy lamp shook with its desperate speed. Ethan watched the rat carefully by the light of the second lamp. He saw it disappear through a hole in one of the great pictures on the wall. I shall check my unpleasant little visitor's home in the morning, said Ethan to himself, picking up his books. The third picture from the fireplace. I shan't forget. He examined the books. He picked up the third book that he had thrown. This is the one that hurt him, he said. Then his face turned pale. Why, it's my mother's old Bible. How strange. He sat down to work again, and once more the rats in the wall started their noise. This did not worry him. Compared with the huge rat, these ones seemed almost friendly, but he could not work. At last, he closed his books and went to bed. The first red light of morning was shining through the window as he closed his eyes. He slept heavily but uneasily, and had unpleasant dreams. Then Mrs. Peterson woke him as usual with tea. His first request to her surprised the old servant very much. Mrs. Peterson, while I'm out today, will you please dust or wash those pictures, particularly the third one from the fireplace? I want to see what they are. Again, Ethan spent most of the day studying happily in the park. On his way home, he again visited Mrs. Gable at the hotel. She had a visitor with her in her comfortable sitting room. Sir, said the landlady, this is Dr. Albright. As soon as she had introduced them, the doctor began to ask Ethan a great many questions. I'm sure, said Ethan to himself, that the good doctor did not call here by accident. He turned to Dr. Albright. I'll gladly answer all your questions if you'll just answer one of mine. The doctor seemed surprised but agreed at once. Did Mrs. Gable ask you to come here and advise me? Asked Ethan. The doctor looked surprised. Mrs. Gable's face turned very red, but the doctor was an honest man and answered quickly, she did. But she didn't want you to know. She's worried about you. She doesn't like you staying there all alone, and she thinks you study too hard and drink too much strong tea. Ethan smiled and held out his hand to Dr. Albright. I must thank you for your kindness, and you too, Mrs. Gable. I promise to take no more strong tea, and I'll be in bed by 1 o'clock. There, that eases my mind very much, said Dr. Albright. Now, tell us all about that old house. Ethan told them everything. When he told them how he had thrown the Bible, Mrs. Gable gave a little scream. When Ethan had finished his story, Dr. Albright looked very serious. The rat always ran up the rope of the alarm bell, he asked. Always. I suppose you know what that rope is? Said the doctor. No, I don't, said Ethan. It is the hangman's rope, said the doctor. After the judge condemned someone to death, the unfortunate soul was hanged with that very rope. Mrs. Gable gave another scream, and the doctor went to fetch her a glass of water. When he returned, he looked hard at Ethan. Listen, young man, he said. If anything happens to you tonight, don't hesitate to ring the alarm bell. I shall be working quite late tonight too, and I'll keep my ears open. Now, don't forget. Ethan laughed. I'm sure I shan't need to do that, he said, and went home for his dinner. I don't like that young man's story, said Dr. Albright after Ethan had left. Perhaps he imagined most of it. All the same, I'll listen tonight for the alarm bell. When Ethan arrived home, Mrs. Peterson had already left, but his supper was ready. The lamp was burning brightly, and there was a good fire. It was a cold, windy evening, but the room was warm and inviting. He was glad to hear the rats again. He remembered how silent they had been when the great rat appeared. After dinner, he opened his books, determined to get some work done. For an hour or two, he worked very well. Then his concentration weakened. It was a stormy night. The whole house seemed to shake, and the wind whistled down the chimneys with a strange, unnatural sound. The force of the wind shook the alarm bell. The pliable rope rose and fell a little, the bottom of it hitting the oak floor with a hard, hollow sound. As Ethan watched it, he remembered the doctor's words, "It's the hangman's rope." He went over and took the rope in his hand, wondering how many people had died on the end of it. As he held it, he felt a new movement. The rope seemed to tremble as if something was moving along it. At the same time, the noise of the rats stopped. Ethan looked up and saw the great rat coming down towards him, staring with hate. Ethan dropped the rope and jumped back with a cry. The rat turned, ran up the rope again, and disappeared. At the same moment, Ethan realized the noise of the other rats had begun again. Very well, my friend, thought Ethan. Let's investigate your hiding place. He lit the other lamp and carried it across to the third picture on the right. He almost dropped the lamp. He stepped back at once, the sweat of fear on his pale face. His knees shook, but he was young and brave, and he moved forward again. Mrs. Peterson had dusted and washed the picture, and Ethan could now see it quite clearly. It showed a judge. He had a cruel, clever, merciless face with a big, curved nose and very bright, hard eyes. As Ethan looked into those eyes, he realized he had seen that look before. The great rat's eyes were exactly the same. They held the same look of hate and cruelty. Then the noise of the rats stopped again, and Ethan became conscious of another pair of eyes looking at him. The great rat was staring at him from the hole in the corner of the picture. But Ethan took no notice and continued to examine the portrait. The judge was sitting in a great high-backed oak chair on the right-hand side of a great stone fireplace. In the corner, a rope hung down from the ceiling. With a feeling of horror, Ethan recognized the room where he now stood. He looked around him, then across to the corner of the fireplace. He froze with fear, and the lamp fell from his trembling hand. There, in the judge's chair, sat the rat. The rope hung behind it, exactly as it did in the picture. The rat looked at Ethan with the same merciless stare as the judge. Everything was silent except for the storm outside. The lamp, fortunately, was metal and had not caught fire. He had to put it out, and in doing so, he forgot his fears for a moment. "I can't go on like this," he said to himself. "The doctor is right. Late hours and strong tea are no good for me." He made himself a warm milky drink and sat down to work. Nearly an hour later, a sudden silence disturbed him again. Outside, the storm was as loud as ever, but inside the house, everything was as quiet as the grave. Then he heard a strange squeaking noise. It came from the corner where the rope hung. He looked up and saw the great rat. It was chewing the rope with its ugly yellow teeth. It had almost bitten through it. As Ethan watched, part of the rope fell to the floor. Only a short piece was still attached to the bell, and the rat was still hanging onto it. Now the rope began to swing. Ethan felt a moment of terrible fear. "Now I can never ring the alarm bell," he thought. Then he was filled with anger. He picked up the book he was reading and threw it violently. He aimed it well, but before the book could hit the creature, it dropped off the rope and landed on the floor. At once, Ethan rushed towards it, but the rat ran away into the shadows. "Let's have another rat hunt before bed," Ethan said to himself. He picked up the lamp and almost dropped it again. The figure of the judge had disappeared from the picture. The chair and the details of the room were still there, but the man himself had gone. Frozen with horror, Ethan moved slowly around. He began to shake, his strength left him, and he was unable to move a muscle. He could only see and hear. There, on the great high-backed oak chair, sat the judge. His merciless eyes stared at Ethan. There was a smile of triumph on his cruel mouth. Slowly, he lifted up a black hat. Ethan's heart was drumming wildly. There was a strange singing noise in his ears. Outside, the wind was as wild as ever. Then, above the screams of the wind, he heard the great clock striking in the marketplace. The triumph on the judge's face grew as the clock struck 12. The judge placed the black hat on his head. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from his chair and picked up the piece of rope from the floor. He made the thick, pliable rope into a noose. He tested the noose with his foot, pulling hard until he was pleased with it. Then he began to move slowly past the table on the opposite side to Ethan. Then, with one quick movement, he stood in front of the door. Ethan was trapped. All this time, the judge's eyes never left Ethan's. Ethan stared into the cruel eyes like a bird watching a cat. He saw the judge coming nearer with his noose. He saw him throw it towards him. Desperately, Ethan threw himself to one side and saw the rope fall harmlessly. Again, the judge raised the noose and tried to catch Ethan. Again and again he tried, all the time staring mercilessly at the student. "He's just playing with me," thought Ethan, like a cat playing with a bird. "Soon he'll catch me and hang me." He looked desperately behind him. Hundreds of rats were watching him with bright, anxious little eyes. Then he saw that the rope of the alarm bell was covered with rats. As he watched, more and more were pouring down onto the rope from the round hole in the ceiling. The rats were hanging from the rope, and there were so many of them that it was swinging backwards and forwards. The alarm bell began to ring, softly at first, then more strongly. At the sound, the judge looked up. A devilish anger spread across his face, his eyes burning like red jewels. Outside, there was a sudden, deafening crash of thunder. The judge raised his noose again while the rats ran desperately up and down the rope. This time, instead of throwing it, the judge moved nearer to Ethan and held the noose open. Ethan was unable to move. He stood there like a stone figure. He felt the judge's icy fingers and the pliable rope against his neck. He felt the noose against his throat. Then the judge picked up the stiff body of the student in his arms. He carried him over to the great oak chair and stood him on it. Then, stepping up beside him, the judge put up his hand and caught the rope of the alarm bell. At his touch, the rats ran away, squeaking with fear. They disappeared through the hole in the ceiling. The judge took the end of the noose which was around Ethan's neck and tied it to the hanging bell rope. Then he climbed down and pulled away the chair. When the alarm bell of the judge's house began to ring, a crowd soon gathered. People came running with lanterns and torches, and soon hundreds were hurrying to the house. They knocked loudly, but there was no reply. Then they broke down the door and poured into the great dining room. The doctor was the first to reach Ethan, but it was too late. There, at the end of the bell rope, hung the body of the student, and from his picture on the wall, the judge stared out once more, a smile of triumph on his face.